Hey there, friend. It's Stephanie Crevens, and today I want to share with you some specific tools and thought processes to help you be a more effective family entertainment center leader now and in the future, right? I'm recording this on April 28th, and we're beginning the conversation about return to work strategies across the country. And no one's for sure what that will look like, but what I do trust is that you will be able to figure it out and you will be able to lead your team and your company in the way that it needs to be led now and in the future. And I want to share with you some resources that will help you do that more effectively and to become a more resilient, focused, and confident leader during these really turbulent times. So I wanted to come on camera real quickly and say hello and introduce myself. I'll tell you a bit more about my background in a minute. But for now, I'm going to turn off the camera to help you and me focus on this content that I've curated for you today. So let's get started. All right, my friends, here's what I have on our agenda. So I'll tell you a little bit more about me. I have a check-in question for you to ask yourself in the spirit of positivity and growth and the opportunities that are emerging because of COVID-19. We're going to talk about the pain of VUCA, right? VUCA is an acronym. If you haven't heard it, I'll introduce it to you in a second. And it's really like I call COVID-19 the ultimate hot mess. Then we're going to talk about the 4 phases of disaster recovery. So I want to show you and teach you a model for how we move through the full spectrum of disaster recovery if you're not familiar. Then we'll talk about you as a leader. How do you maintain confidence, resiliency, and focus during a really tough time where I know you're being pulled in a million different directions, being asked to be more nimble and flexible than ever before, and same for your team. How do you lead now? Then we're going to talk about tools for running better meetings because I don't know what your workload looks like, but right now I have a ton more meetings than ever before, and I'm guessing you do too. How do we make the most use of that time, of that really expensive company time, so you get the most out of it? And then in your handouts, you'll have time for some action planning and reflection as well, which is a really key part of the learning process to make sure you take what you've learned today and actually put it into action. So as we're getting started, I want you to think about this question as you get your PowerPoint slide deck together for your handout or for your notes, as well as your handouts that have been provided as part of this webinar so that you can work through those exercises as we go along and as we wrap up at the end of this. So here's the question I want you to think about. And you can write it in your handouts or you can just ponder it, whatever your style is here. What's been the most surprising thing for you to learn during this disaster? For some leaders, it's how well the team is bonded. For some leaders, it's how quickly things seem to devolve on the team, right? Like how the emotions ran high and the stress ran over and they didn't know how to manage it. During change, during stress, during surprising transitions, different people respond in a variety of ways. And I know you're feeling that as the leader of your family entertainment center. What has been surprising? And it could be good, it could be not so good, it could be growth oriented. Write that down in your notes as a way to reflect on what you're learning now as a leader. For our time together during this webinar, I wanted to set up some agreements that I hope will help you get the most out of this content that I've put together for you today. So I hope that you'll take the time to not do other work while we're together and instead focus on these slides and these content and your learning, right? And also think about suspending judgment of yourself and others as we go through this content. We spend a lot of time blaming ourselves, blaming others, assuming that we should know better, assuming that we should have it all figured out. Those are all judgments that are just not helpful. Allow yourself to be where you're at, allow your team to be where they're at, right? No one's handled COVID-19 or this kind of global pandemic, especially at this business level, in a long time. I'm talking going back to 1918, right? There's certainly situations that we can learn from, like the 9/11, like the recession of 2008, but it's just not quite the same, right? COVID-19 is this silent killer. And so I apologize for being so morbid, but it is wreaking havoc in our businesses in a new way because we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't feel it. We can't mitigate it, we don't feel like, until it's right there in front of us. And I know so many of our businesses have been impacted in that way, right? When the shutdown and stay-at-home orders went down in early March to late March, depending on where you are, it just wreaked havoc on our businesses, blew your budgets and your projections out of the water. Those were no longer relevant. So the key to being successful in times like this is maintaining our presence, our resiliency, and our focus. So let's do that. I invite you to do that as we walk through this workshop content together. So, a little bit about me. The reason I'm here is Creative Works and I have been partners for a while now, and I know how important you are to them. And I wanted to contribute to those relationships that mean the world to them. And so, because of that, you mean the world to me, and I want to equip you as a leader to be even more effective now, to be even more intentional, focused, and have that emotional resiliency that can carry us through to success. I know so many folks are talking about feeling stressed and overwhelmed and afraid. I don't want to negate any of that. Those are very real feelings. But the reality is too is that we can also move through this with a level of presence, a level of confidence and courage, even when we feel afraid. And that's my work on an everyday basis with companies across the country. I have the good fortune of working with a lot of small business Gen X leaders in the B2B and B2C markets, usually on professional services, consultative side, and service industry in general. And so I share these leadership techniques on a day-to-day basis with my clients across the country. And I tell you this from the heart that these are even more applicable than ever. So that's why they're so important for you to have in front of you now so that you can lead with the confidence and the focus that you deserve and that your company deserves and that your team deserves. Because now more than ever, as you know, they're looking to you for guidance as to how to respond. And so your presence is more important than ever. As the top leader in your company, you are responsible for setting the tone and people are watching you. And so I want to give you some tips and tools to lead in the way that you want to now. So let's dig in, my friends. All right, so VUCA, I call it the hot mess, right? This term was coined in the 90s, and it relates to the speed of change, the lack of information that has kind of blown up in the business world in the last several decades. And it's more impactful than ever, right? More relevant than ever. So VUCA is this acronym that stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. You know, business used to be a bit more simple, a bit more straightforward. The speed of change was much slower, which meant that many more aspects of our businesses could be led with intentionality. And as the world has sped up for a variety of reasons, we've introduced more volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity than ever before. And certainly this COVID-19 situation, this global pandemic, has introduced the ultimate VUCA into our business. It has just thrown everything for the loop, or, for a loop. It has taken many of our 2020 plans completely off of our plates and redirected our focus into many urgent situations. We're triaging our work and our people in ways that we've never been asked to before. And my hope for you as a leader is that you will emerge stronger because of it. Now, of course, there's going to be some emotional stress response that happens in our organizations, which is completely valid because we're human beings. But in a year's time frame, I want you to be able to look back as a leader and feel confident that you did everything possible to lead your business and your people in the way that you wanted to with the information that you had. And so VUCA is always surmountable with the right level of decision making, with confidence, by creating simplicity where that's possible, to create a certain level of certainty where it's possible, to control the controllables. So, how do we transition out of VUCA? Well, I believe that we transition out of VUCA with new knowledge. And I want to share with you today, as it relates to your leadership, the 4 phases of disaster and emergency management. We are smack dab in the middle of number 3 and hopefully transitioning to number 4 sometime in the near future. Here's where this model comes from. So early on in my career, I had the good fortune of working for Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. I had multiple responsibilities as a as a one person marketing department, and one of those was disaster response. So I actually started my job early in 2005 because of Hurricane Katrina. It was making landfall over New Orleans and Mississippi and in the Gulf Coast of the United States, as I was accepting my new job at Catholic Charities. And what happened in the fallout of that, and how it impacted the rest of the United States, was that the Catholic Charities in New Orleans had a very strong presence, and so they were able to respond very quickly in collaboration with the Red Cross. The Red Cross has the national and many international contracts, but has the national contract with the federal government to respond directly to disasters immediately after they happen. So the Red Cross is on the ground stabilizing homes and lives and getting people to the hospitals and getting them into hotels when their homes have been obliterated for about 2 to 6 weeks after any disaster. And then Catholic Charities has the national contract at a national and federal level to do disaster recovery, which is what happens starting at the 6 week mark and up to 2 years after a tragedy impacts a community. So you can imagine with Hurricane Katrina, there was a ton of disaster recovery that had to happen. And in our archdiocese here in Indianapolis, we had an amazing flooding, no pun intended, of generosity. We had over $1 million that was donated to our diocese to help evacuees and victims of Hurricane Katrina. And so between my boss and I and a couple of other committee members, we quickly figured out how to help and what was the best use of those $1 million donations, because that's a significant amount of money that could really change lives. And so if you will recall, back in 2005, New Orleans got a lot of coverage and a lot of assistance after Hurricane Katrina. The need was great there, don't get me wrong, but the other smaller communities along the Gulf coastline were left to fend for themselves in some ways. And so we had some parishioners who found this community called Waveland, Mississippi, that had been obliterated. The eye of the storm passed over their beach, actually passed over the Catholic parish that was about, oh gosh, not even 100 feet off the beach, or not even 100 yards off the beach. They found this community that really needed some help, but didn't know how to organize themselves, didn't have the resources to make it happen, didn't have the political power to draw in other resources. And so we directed our efforts there. We set up an entire volunteer recovery camp using these Quonset huts from the Army, where volunteers could stay from our diocese and across the country and help rebuild homes. So we were there for about 2.5 years, dispersing some of our funds that we had, and also dispersing those funds locally, because we had evacuees that had landed in Indianapolis. So I say all that to say, disaster recovery is a multi-year, multi-pronged approach to restabilize lives and businesses, companies, and homes. And so that exact same logic can be applied to this COVID-19 situation. And so I want to share with you today the 4 phases and how eventually we're going to get you back to number 1. But I'm actually going to start with phase 3, because that's where we're at today at the recording of this webinar and workshop. And then we'll move into 4, and then eventually we'll get back to number 1 and 2. And so I know many of you have felt caught off guard by this situation, right? The reality is that major health organizations have been planning for a global pandemic, and we've seen them play out with Ebola and other places around the globe, but it's never hit home, and it's never hit our small businesses in this way in the United States. And so for folks who are like, well, we didn't see this coming, well, powers that be saw it coming. That's completely irrelevant right now, my friends. What is relevant is that COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on your business plans, your team. Probably still triaging some of those most pressing issues as a result of the stay-at-home orders in your estate. And you're probably still helping your team deal with some of the emotional well-being issues that come up during stressful times. And I would encourage you as a leader to keep doing that. That's where the connection and presence can really develop strongly among your team, when you take on the commitment to help them deal with, understand the emotions that come along with rapid change, with frustration, and with stress. You need to be communicating regularly with your key constituencies. That could be the media, that could be customers, that could be other clients, it could be your suppliers, right? Many things are being disrupted right now. Make sure that you're communicating consistently and on a regular interval that makes sense for your business so that folks feel connected to you and feel like you're doing your part as a leader and as a company. Now is the time that you should be implementing your business continuity plans and crisis communication plans. I don't know if you had one beforehand before this, but by God, as we get you through these 4 steps of disaster recovery and response, we will get you to have one at the end of this journey. Now is not the time to be creating that. Now is the time to be documenting, what are you learning? What weaknesses and strengths are being revealed in your business right now? How do you wish you would have communicated based on how rapidly everything went down? There's a lot to learn. Now is not the time to necessarily be fixing all of these issues, but making notes and documenting what's happening so that when we transition back to some level of stability and continuity and steadiness in our businesses, you can begin fixing these issues. So if you don't have a business continuity plan right now, don't try and craft it. Instead, remain nimble and move forward with what you do have and what you are doing, and document what you're learning so that we can capture it later. And of course, as many of you have had to adapt as your revenue has dried up, as your facilities have closed, analyzing those budget implications, creating contingency plans based on what we might think what we might think will happen moving forward in 2020, 2021, and beyond. And of course, I know this is obvious. So many of you have been reconfiguring your staffing needs. And my heart goes out to the tough decisions that you've had to make. And I hope that you will be able to bring back the right team members to serve your businesses moving forward. And many of you have been successful in looking at what your business does need now and keeping those folks on staff to help you reconfigure space and get it clean again and sterilize and sanitize to move forward for when you can welcome guests back. So the 4th phase of disaster response is recovery. This is what we're transitioning into in May, June, July, and even longer into the summer as this transition begins to play out. We're just now starting to talk about models for how you bring your staff back together, right? Your facilities were built to bring people together, not for social distancing. So as we think about recovery for family entertainment centers and others in the industry, how do we bring people together safely in a clean way so that we don't continue to spread the disease, but yet you can continue to create those memories that your facilities are known for? As a business owner, you're probably also seeing those organizational weaknesses being revealed right now. During the recovery phase, this is the time to begin working on those. You might have to adapt your strategic plan. You might need to identify new areas for investment and divestment, right? Those are both important decisions. It's not all about adding new. It's about adapting what you can and answering some of the tough questions about whether or not you want to continue certain lines of business that you were doing pre-COVID-19. You want to create those transition plans for all of your stakeholders, your employees, your customers, your suppliers, the many different people and groups that make your business possible. And of course, continue to manage with your staff that ongoing stress. So oftentimes what I see with people during a stress response, during a traumatic situation, is that there are those that hold it together. They are, the firefighters that come in and solve the problems and make it happen. And usually there's kind of an emotional hangover and collapse that happens after the acute stress is gone. That's one way of responding. Other folks kind of, when things go off the rails, they go off the rails. The emotions run high. They can't seem to control them. They can't get their stress under control and show up with presence. And eventually they'll get it together, and they're going to be your folks that you need who are more in a more stable place as your immediate responders are starting to feel the impact of the stress. And so what's really important about recovery is acknowledging that you can move to more long-term decision making. You don't always have to be triaging and acting like everything's on fire. So when you're in the recovery space, you can help yourself and your team and the business make better long-term decisions just by acknowledging that, guys, we don't have to be making these rapid fire decisions every single day, all of the time. Let's slow down and think about it. And I have another webinar on this platform as part of Amusement Recovery on the use of the 90-day sprint and how you can use that to serve your business during both the disaster response phase as well as the recovery space to help your company stay nimble, to help it adapt to the new environment for all the things that are still going to come up that we don't have the answers to yet. But you can figure that out as we walk along, right? I feel like the recovery phase is walking down a wooded path in the fog. You can't always see the path up ahead, but you can see the few steps in front of you. And as long as you keep moving and make the best decision in the moment, you will figure it out. That part I know to be true. So then, because again, disaster recovery and response is a cycle, we will one day get back to the mitigation phase. This is where you are able to set up your foundational documents to create and review your plans to make sure that you are set up for success when something like this happens again. Right? Many public health officials are calling for another spike sometime later this year. I want you to be better and more prepared for when that happens. Or when another global pandemic breaks out in the United States, I want you to be better prepared. Or some other disaster, a fire in your building, an active shooter situation, God forbid, right? I want you to feel prepared for when these crises happen, when these disasters happen, both in an acute way and something that has a bit more long-term impact like COVID-19. So make sure that risk management is integrated into your staffing and into your business processes. Make sure that someone is accountable. It's written into their job description, and it might be your job description as a small business, but make sure someone is responsible and accountable for creating these plans moving forward. Make sure you have that business continuity plan, right? You probably learned a lot as you help people transition to work from home as was relevant for your business. Make sure that gets documented and you always have that technology up to date and ready to go. And when you're working with a really great outsourced CTO or some other technology resource, they can help you think through all of those issues. Same with operations, same with finance. Make sure that you have a strong media strategy to communicate with your various stakeholders, social media, regular news channels, your email list. Make sure you have all of your channels outlined and how you will communicate with your people, both internally and externally, should this happen again. And then, because one of the issues with COVID-19 is there's been too many sources of information. We don't necessarily know who we can trust and who we can't. And at this point in the response and recovery, you've probably found your people, you've found your resources you can trust. That's awesome. Let's line those up now. So next time something goes down, know who are your people that you can trust with information. Who can you go back to with amusement recovery as a resource? You know, if those are your people, make sure that you visit and share with those other leaders on this platform so that you can continue to learn from people in your industry that are going through what you're going through. You know, the CDC, your state Department of Health, your local health department in some cases can be trusted. Sometimes they can be a source of misinformation, but make sure you have your list of your credible resources for the people that you trust. So then step two, which after step two would bring us back to an actual incident where we're in that response and recovery mode. Step two is preparedness. Step two is stress testing your systems, practicing your active shooter drills so that when it does go down, people feel better prepared. Make sure that you sometimes have work from home days to test your IT capabilities, reviewing those insurance policies with your insurance professional to make sure you're covered and able to make adjustments on at least a yearly basis for unknown disasters and foreseeable events, right? Run scenario planning workshops. Pardon me, sometimes my words get ahead of myself here, but run those scenario planning workshops at least, once a year, if not once a quarter, to prepare for huge disruptions to your business, and you know what steps you're going to take should your revenue drop by 25%, should it drop by 50%. And of course, using this most recent situation as a guide, what steps did you take now that helped be successful? What are steps you wish you would have been, what are steps you wish you would have done differently in order to be more successful moving forward? So right now we are in the phase of documenting what we're learning and beginning to make some adjustments in our business, but know that you have time to fix those issues. Some key pieces that you can do within your facilities now to change the layout, to up your game in that rewards room, to maybe reconfigure the staff lounge to make it more comfortable for them, right? There are some key facility things that you can do now, but business process wise, prioritize that list, document what you're learning, create a timeline for what you need to address now and in the future, but don't feel the need to address every single business weakness that you're seeing now, because we've got time as we move into recovery, as we move back into mitigation. The important piece that I want you to take away is document what you're learning. My friends, I now want to transition to talking about you as a family entertainment center business leader. You're probably on here as a CEO, as a manager, as a vice president. You have a key responsibility to your people and to the company to show up in the best way possible. And of course, you're human, right? Like, you're allowed to be stressed, you're allowed to be afraid. That's all understandable. But know that your leadership style right now is setting the tone for how your people believe they should also be behaving in this environment. And so they are looking to you for calm, for steadiness, for communication. And I love this quote, right? This is the ultimate test of your leadership and an opportunity for you to show your employees what you're made of. You've accepted the responsibility of being a top leader in your company, and now is the time to demonstrate to your people why you deserve their respect and their trust in these stressful times. And this is from an article, this is in your handouts if you're interested, from Harvard Business Review, about what your people are looking for during times of crisis. And so, friends, this is your opportunity to grow your resiliency and focus as a leader, to look in the mirror and really ask yourself, how do I want to show up? And I believe the key part to designing how you want to show up is knowing your values and living those out consistently. Because the more consistent that you are in your behaviors, the more people will trust you. And so if you cannot name off your values and what your top values are as a leader and how you want to live those out with your team, in the handout, I've provided you a tool so that you can identify those values and identify the behaviors that you associate with those values and how you want to show up with your people, right? If you really value authenticity, how do you demonstrate that to the world? How do you demonstrate that to your team? Because again, the more consistently you show up, the more they will trust you. The more they trust you, the further they will go with you, the more challenges that they'll be willing to take on with you because they trust you. As a leader, here's what they're looking to you for: both pragmatism and hope. Be willing to say, I don't have all the answers, right? Here's where we're at today. Here's where I hope we can be in the future. Let's work together to close that gap. So it doesn't have to be a Pollyanna vision of the future, because that will actually probably destroy the trust that they have with you a little bit, because they can't trust that everything will be all right in the long term. But we can convey hope, right? We will return. Our business will return. Our doors will reopen. It's probably going to look a lot different than what we think it will today. But I trust that all of us can figure out how to do what's safe and right and still continue to make memories through our family entertainment center. Use the 90-day sprint to remain nimble and flexible and engage your entire team as we move forward. So many of us are used to strategic planning, which has a 3 to 5 year timeline on it, horizon. A 90-day sprint allows us to stay connected to our business's vision, mission, and values, yet also respond to the external environment that is changing so rapidly. And don't forget, as a leader, take care of yourself first. Make sure that you're tending to your own emotional, physical, and spiritual needs during this time, not only as a role model to your team to do the same thing so that they don't allow overwhelm to take over their decision making, but because simply as a human being, you need it. You are being tasked with a lot of decisions right now, so you run the risk of decision fatigue. You're being tasked with a lot of responsibility and more pressure than ever to do the right thing. Make sure you create space in your life to just be, to have a little bit of respite, to relax. And now, my friends, is the time to ask your team to step up their game in key places in the business, right? It's not all about raising the expectations and confusing people right off the bat, but now is the time to make sure that when you reopen your doors to your customers, you are giving the world the best version of your company. Ask your team to raise their expectations and hold them to it, because now is the time to do it. Now is the time to seize the opportunity that COVID-19 has given us and make our businesses even more successful. And I'm not being Pollyanna here. I'm not being overly enthusiastic. I know if you're a leader that trusts in the future and trusts in your own capabilities as a business leader, you're with me here. And that now is the time to step up our game and make even more possible than what we thought was going to happen even 3 months ago, 4 months ago. The universe has given us a pause for a reason. Let's make sure that we leverage it and turn it into something even more amazing for our businesses. The second step to that, and so the first step is making sure you know who you are as a leader, how you want to show up. The second step is making sure that you ask your team to step up their game during this challenging time. The third step is using healthy conflict in order to do that. Too many meetings don't really dive into the true issues that need to be decided. So it's this iceberg metaphor, right? We all know what sank the Titanic. It wasn't necessarily the piece of the iceberg that they could see. It was the piece of the iceberg they couldn't see, because every iceberg is designed like this. The same with our meetings, the same with our team conflict or lack thereof. So there's actually 3 types of conflict. The first is artificial harmony, and this is from the team building expert Patrick Lencioni. If you're not familiar with this stuff, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, the advantage, I would really encourage you to dig into that. He's one of my role models in this space. But he says there are 3 types of conflict, and only one is helpful on a team environment to get the most out of the team and the company and people as a whole. So the first, which I see a lot in my organizations because I work with a lot of really nice people, is artificial harmony. This sense that we can't really speak out, the fact that we shouldn't rock the boat. I'm going to say what I think you want to hear to your face, and then I'm actually going to go gossip about you behind your back. None of that is helpful. The intention is to not create too much conflict, to not shake things up too quickly or too much. So the intent is good, but the outcome is not helpful at all, especially to an organization that's going to demand higher expectations to serve the world even more effectively as you reopen your doors. The opposite end of artificial harmony is aggression or it's almost like violence, frankly, in the workplace. Think about the leader who slams his fists on the table to get his point across, who consistently raises his voice as a way to get you to shut yours down. I don't see this a lot with my clients, again, because I work with a lot of really nice people, but it is a leadership style that is out there and is effective in the short term to get people to do what you want them to do. It's not motivating in the long term if you want people to trust you and to think creatively and to be innovative. And so 2 polar opposite ends of the spectrum of conflict that are not helpful: artificial harmony. And then on the opposite end is that aggressive type of conflict where you attack each other openly. There's a lot of politicking. There's a lot of throwing people under the bus, et cetera, et cetera. The one that's in the middle that you need now more than ever is that healthy conflict where people are willing to debate the ideas in order to produce the best result. That's where this iceberg metaphor comes in, is you as a leader, because you trust yourself, because you trust your team, because your team trusts you, you're more willing to go deeper together, because this is where the true opportunities lie, is when we really dig into the hard issues, the hard questions that we have to answer now so that we can be even more successful moving forward. So where does this conflict happen the most? Well, it tends to happen in meetings. So I want to share with you a 3-step process to getting the most out of your meetings so that you can have more healthy conflict, so that you can debate the ideas more effectively together. And as a leader running these meetings, there are 3 steps you need to follow for every single meeting to get the most out of your people. Because as you know, some of your people really need that information in advance so they can critically think through the information and show up with their best ideas and best questions. Some of us are more comfortable making decisions on the fly and debating on the fly. There's no one right or wrong way to do this, and it's all based on behavioral profiles. But what we do need to do is make sure that we equip all of our people to be prepared for the meetings in the way that best leverages their behavioral style and helps them contribute their critical thinking in the best way possible. So 3 steps to every meeting. It's not just about the meeting. It is about what to do beforehand, what to do during and after. So first steps to making sure you help your people be prepared is that every time you send out a meeting invite, you let them know what the purpose, expectations, and timing is for the meeting. And of course, we have to honor those boundaries, right? If it's a 1-hour meeting, stick to the 1-hour meeting. If it's 2 hours or somewhere in between, stick to the time that you have asked for. The second step is making sure that you create an outcome-based, time-constrained agenda for critical decisions. It's a fancy way of saying, make sure you let people know what decisions must be made in that meeting. What has to be different when you leave that time together? If it's, hey guys, we need to reconsider a new insurance provider, here are the proposals I've received from 3 people. By the time we leave this meeting, we must decide on the proposal that we're going with and who will be following up and be the contact with the insurance broker when we move forward for implementing that new policy. Very simple, right? We have to make sure we focus on what are the decisions that have to be made in this meeting. And sometimes meetings are just brainstorming meetings. That's fine too. Just say that's the outcome for the meeting. The consent agenda, so you have two agendas rocking during any meeting. Very simply, a consent agenda is just making sure you send that information ahead of time for people to review. Ideally 24, 48 hours in advance in a fast-moving culture. For a slower moving culture, 5 to 7 business days in advance if you have time, right? But definitely at a minimum 24 hours so people know to block off time before the meeting to review that information. So the agenda has 2 parts. One is, what are the decisions that have to be made? And then 2, here's the information to support our decision making during the meeting. So what do you do during the meeting? Friends, your job as a leader is to facilitate the meeting. I've done some research into this with Harvard Business Review and other leadership journals. It's something like 80% of all leaders think that their meetings are awesome. You know why they think their meetings are awesome? Is because they're doing most of the talking. As a leader, your job, instead of making sure your perspective gets heard, your job is to make sure everyone's perspective gets heard and they have input into the outcome-based agenda so that you can benefit from the variety of perspectives that exist within your company. So how do you do that? Well, you set ground rules for engagement, not just attendance. Too often we interpret silence as agreement. I will tell you, my friends, silence very rarely ever equals agreement with an idea. Set ground rules for how people participate. Silence your phones. Keep your phones off the table. We only take handwritten notes because when you're on your laptop, we're assuming something else. Now, of course, in the virtual work world, that's been completely turned upside down, but set those ground rules for engagement so that you know people are there to participate. Every action has to have a person responsible with a deadline. You can't put a team's name by an action step and expect it to get done. That's just not how we operate as human beings. Make sure you're drawing everyone into the conversation. Pay attention who's talking too much and too little. And as the facilitator, draw out those voices. If you tend to be the first person to speak, find a way to be the third person to speak. If you tend to be the last person to speak, find a way to be the third person to speak, right? Don't always feel the need to jump in or summarize other people's ideas at the end. We all, again, based on our behavioral profile, we all have different habits, but we need to create an even playing field so that all perspectives can be present in that meeting. As the leader of the meeting, as a facilitator, I want you to look for commitment to moving forward through action steps, not consensus. So, consensus, the definition I use there, consensus is that everyone agrees on how you're going to move forward and what the action steps are, not what the results that you're seeking are. That is the fastest way to get nothing done. Especially during this time, we need a majority rules in terms of commitment, right? You set the limit for how many people you need to agree to the path forward before you move forward. That's, you know, your company way better than I do, but look for commitment, not 100% agreement. You need different roles in your meetings, and those need to rotate. So at a minimum, in a meeting, you need a facilitator, a note taker, and a timekeeper. And make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to practice those skills and hold those different positions. Make sure that at the end of the meeting, you leave time for everyone to report out on the decisions that have been made and their action steps. If not everyone is in agreement as to what the decisions that has been made are, you need to continue the conversation till everyone agrees this is how we are moving forward. And I'm a big fan of everyone reports out their own action steps. That's not for the note taker to report out for people, because you need that ownership of this is what I will do by when. And then, of course, as you make decisions, as you decide on your outcomes and move the business forward, make sure that you determine intervals for benchmarking and feedback. When are you going to come back and evaluate whether or not your decisions are being successful? Design that now. And then set the next meeting as needed before you move forward. I have another webinar on this platform about the 90-day sprint, as I've shared with you earlier. This has some great information on how to use the 90-day sprint and any planning, a timeline to set feedback, set those intervals for benchmark and feedback. Because you're not seeking consensus, not everyone's going to agree on how you move forward. You want to make sure you have a mechanism in place to capture their feedback on the back end and adjust your timing and adjust what you're learning based on what you're implementing. Because chances are they have a perspective that needs to be heard and needs to be inserted into the process. It just didn't get there on the first round of action steps, and that's okay. And then, of course, set your next meeting while you have everybody together. It's just a really efficient way to do that. After the meeting, make sure that you have what I'm calling a bulletin board. I was inspired by Seth Godin's email recently about how to create a bulletin board for every project. Digital or old school, it doesn't matter, but you need a place to capture all of the action steps, the assignments, deadlines, the goals, the results, so that people can see it. A really ineffective way of doing that is always sending out an attached document that's been updated. How can you create a digital or old school way for people to always see up-to-date information? For those of us who grew up in the time where you tried out for basketball in middle school and there was a bulletin board where you went to see if your name was on there or not, right? That's a bulletin board. And the value of that, again, I just read this from Seth Godin, so I don't want to take any credit for this, but the value of that is you always have one place with all of the updated information. It really creates efficiency in your communication, but it also creates effectiveness because people always know where to go for the most up-to-date information. In the Agile framework, folks use the Kanban board as a way to create visibility into what work they're working on. You know, every methodology, there's something slightly different. The point is, use a common way for people to always see where the work is. It increases your accountability for yourself and for others to know that they're following through. Also, after a meeting, what tends to happen is the folks who didn't speak up and share their perspective, what do? They go to each of their colleagues that was in that meeting and say, I can't believe they didn't take my idea. I can't believe they're doing this. Da, 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 da. One, it's a really expensive use of time. Two, it really it really puts that person in a bad light. I don't think they truly understand the impact to their reputation there, because they're not willing to have the courage to speak up during the meeting. And instead, they rely on more passive aggressive communication tactics to influence how they want this project to go. And that should be unacceptable, my friends. So if they come to you and try to have a meeting after the meeting, as a leader, I need you to squelch that. I need you to say, you know what? I appreciate your perspective, and you need to bring it up while we're all together. With that, there are many organizations that sit and spin on ideas and never move forward. You know your culture better than me. You might have one of these. And so I've certainly worked in one where every meeting we revisited every single decision that had been made about a project. And you know what? Never move forward? That project. So make sure that you're not revisiting decisions unless something new has truly emerged, right? There could be new information. And of course, in uncertain times, we need to make sure that we're adapting, but that is different than constantly revisiting decisions that have already been made. Be confident in your leadership style that you can move forward despite the uncertainty and move forward and take action. And then, of course, after a meeting, assess the technology. You're going to have folks at various levels of technological acumen, if you will. Make sure you're working with them so that they can fully participate, and that technology is not the barrier to them participating in that meeting. Really, really important. Have patience with your people to get them up to speed, and understand that they do need to fully participate and they need to learn the technology to make that happen. Or, if Zoom isn't working for you, and GoToMeeting might be a better option. Sometimes the platform is the problem based on your team dynamics. This is your opportunity to look at that as well. So friends, I would encourage you, as we wrap up our conversation today, think intentionally about your leadership style, how you're showing up now. It will help a lot of the stress and the overwhelm go away because you feel confident in doing what is the next best thing for you and your team right now. No one has it all figured out. No one has all the answers. What the times like this call us to is to do the next best thing. And I know you got this. So friends, I encourage you, go to the handouts, identify your top values, what makes you you as a leader, and begin purposefully, intentionally leading that out with your team. Also in your handouts, you'll see your meeting checklist that you can use moving forward, starting today, right? You're watching this webinar, your next meeting, implement these ideas to make sure you're getting the most out of your time together. A meeting is some of the most expensive company time that there is. Make sure that you're getting the most out of that time. And friends, take the time on your handouts again to write down action steps. What do you need to do differently based on what you've learned today? What's your most helpful takeaway from this workshop for you? And I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to hear your action steps. So here's my email, my phone number. Reach out to me directly. I'm here for you, my friend, to help you be the leader that your team needs now into the rest of 2020 and beyond. And I look forward to having our paths cross again soon. Thank you.